They say home is where the heart is. But what happens when the people who gave you life decide you don't deserve a place in theirs anymore? I was 18 when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to have Sunday dinners, and told me I had 2 weeks to leave. Not because I'd done something wrong, not because I was a bad kid, but because my older brother Marcus was getting married, and they needed my bedroom for his future wife's craft studio. A craft studio. Let that sink in. I'd lived in that room my entire life. My height marks were still penciled on the doorframe. My first drawing was still taped inside the closet. The wallpaper I'd picked out when I was 12, covered in tiny stars, still glowed faint green in the dark. But none of that mattered. Marcus was the golden child, the successful one, the one who made them proud, and I was just taking up space. My mother didn't even look at me when she said it. She just stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug in that rhythmic way that used to comfort me as a child. "Sophia," she said, her voice flat and final. "You're 18 now. You're an adult. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet." My father nodded along, arms crossed over his chest, jaw set like this was some kind of tough love lesson and not abandonment. Like they were doing me a favor, teaching me resilience. I asked where I was supposed to go. My voice cracked when I said it, and I hated myself for showing weakness. They shrugged in unison, a choreographed indifference that made my stomach turn. "Figure it out," my father said, his tone casual, like he was suggesting I pick up milk on the way home. That's what adults do. I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. I left behind photo albums filled with pictures of a family that no longer wanted me. Stuffed animals from childhood that suddenly felt like relics of someone else's life. My first pair of ballet shoes, the satin worn thin from years of practice. The diary I'd kept since I was 13, filled with hopes and dreams that now seemed foolish. Everything that didn't fit into those 3 bags got left behind, donated, discarded, erased. My little sister Emma, she was only 12 then, cried in the hallway as I dragged my bags down the stairs. The wheels of my suitcase thumped against each step, a countdown to the end of everything I'd known. She tried to hug me, her small arms reaching around my waist, her face buried in my jacket. But my mother pulled her back, fingers digging into Emma's shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice sharp. As if I was the one making it hard. As if my existence was the problem. I spent the first 3 nights sleeping in my car. A beat-up Honda Civic I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the bookstore. It smelled like old coffee and the vanilla air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror that had long since lost its scent. The back seat became my bed. My gym bag became my pillow. I parked behind a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and waitresses who'd seen it all. I used their bathroom to brush my teeth in the mornings, washing my face with hand soap that left my skin tight and dry. The staff knew. I could see it in their eyes when I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of coffee and a piece of toast, and made it last for hours. They didn't say anything, but I could feel their pity. And I hated that look more than I hated the ache in my back from sleeping curled up in a space too small for my body. On the 4th day, my coworker Rachel found out. She was older, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She cornered me in the break room and asked point-blank if I was living in my car. I tried to lie, but she saw right through me. "You're staying with me," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. She let me crash on her couch for 2 months, refusing to take rent even though I offered everything I had. "You save that money," she told me. "You're going to need it." And I did. I saved every penny, working double shifts at the bookstore, picking up weekend shifts at a coffee shop, babysitting for neighbors I barely knew. I lived off dollar menu meals and learned to stretch a box of pasta for a week. And after 2 months, I had enough for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It was 400 square feet. The heat barely worked, rattling and clanking through ancient pipes that kept me awake at night. The neighbors were loud, their fights bleeding through paper-thin walls. The carpet was stained, the paint was chipped, and the refrigerator hummed so loudly I thought it might explode. But it was mine. I signed the lease with trembling hands, my name written in ink that felt permanent and powerful. Sophia Chen tenant. Not daughter. Not burden. Tenant. I bought a used mattress from a thrift store and a lamp from a garage sale. I hung curtains I'd sewn myself from clearance fabric, and I stood in the middle of that tiny broken space and cried. Not because it was sad, but because I'd done it. I'd survived. I worked 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. I took every shift the bookstore offered, alphabetizing shelves until my fingers cramped, recommending novels to customers who sometimes listened and sometimes didn't. I picked up weekend work doing everything I could find. Cleaning houses, walking dogs, tutoring high school kids in English and history. Anything that paid. I didn't go to college. I couldn't afford it. While Marcus and his wife lived rent-free in my childhood home, posting vacation photos on social media and talking about starting a family, I was living off ramen noodles and learning how to fix a leaking faucet from YouTube videos. My parents never called. Not once. Not on my birthday. Not on Christmas. Not when I got bronchitis and spent 3 days alone in my apartment, too sick to work, too proud to ask for help. It was like I'd never existed. Like 18 years of my life had been erased the moment I walked out that door. Emma tried. She'd sneak texts sometimes, short and careful, always when our parents weren't looking. "I miss you," she'd write. "The house feels empty without you. Mom made your favorite dinner last night, but no one said your name. It's like you're a ghost." I'd text back, telling her I missed her too, telling her I loved her, telling her to focus on school and not worry about me. But the truth was, every message from her was a reminder of what I'd lost. Of the sister I couldn't protect. Of the childhood bedroom that was now filled with someone else's hobbies. Of the family dinners I'd never attend again. She was young and still under their control, still dependent on people who could cut her off as easily as they'd cut me. So I told her I understood. I told her to be careful, and I kept working. By the time I was 22, I'd saved enough to take a real estate licensing course. I studied at night after 12-hour shifts, my eyes burning under the dim light of my desk lamp, highlighting paragraphs in textbooks I'd bought used and marked up until the pages were more yellow than white. I studied property law and market analysis and the art of negotiation. I took practice exams until I could recite contract clauses in my sleep. And I passed on my first try, scoring in the top 10%. I started working for a small agency that took a chance on me even though I had no degree, no connections, no safety net. Just hunger. The kind of hunger you only get when you've slept in your car and know what it feels like to be thrown away like trash. Just determination. The kind that comes from knowing that failure isn't an option because there's no one to catch you if you fall. I was good at it. Really good. I understood what people wanted because I'd wanted it so desperately myself. Security, stability, a place that couldn't be taken from you. A home that was yours, legally and completely, where no one could tell you to pack your bags and leave. I listened when clients talked about their fears. I negotiated fiercely on their behalf. I worked weekends and holidays, showing houses in the rain and the heat, learning neighborhoods and school districts and market trends. And slowly my reputation grew. Within 3 years, I was one of the top agents in the city, closing deals that made my boss whistle low and shake his head in disbelief. By 25, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on my own small condo. By 27, I'd opened my own firm, Sophia Chen Realty. My name on the door, my rules, my success. And at 30, I was standing outside the house I grew up in, holding the keys. I'd bought it. The whole thing. My parents had fallen behind on the mortgage. My father's business, a small consulting firm he'd run for decades, had failed when his biggest client went bankrupt. My mother's health had declined, diabetes and high blood pressure and a series of small strokes that left her slower, frailer, dependent. Marcus, the golden child, had moved across the country for a job in Seattle and rarely visited, too busy with his own life to deal with their problems. They'd tried to refinance, tried to sell, but the market was tough, the neighborhood had declined, and the house needed repairs they couldn't afford. New roof, Updated electrical, a foundation that was slowly cracking. It sat on the market for 8 months, the price dropping every few weeks, the listing photos showing rooms that looked tired and sad. And when I saw the listing, scrolling through properties late one night in my office, I didn't hesitate. I stared at those photos. The kitchen where my mother had told me to leave. The living room where my father had shrugged when I asked where I was supposed to go. The bedroom that had been mine, now painted a different color, the star wallpaper covered over. And I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. I made an offer through a third-party LLC I'd set up for investment properties. They never knew it was me. The paperwork was clean, professional, distant. No names that would raise flags. No connection to the daughter they'd discarded. The sale went through quietly, the bank eager to unload a property that had been bleeding them dry. And on closing day, I drove to the house, parked in the driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike, and walked up to the door. I knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed louder than they should have. My father answered. He looked older. So much older. His hair had gone completely gray, his shoulders stooped, his face lined with a weariness I didn't remember. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing, trying to place my face. Like I was a stranger. Like I was someone he might have known once, in another life. "Sophia?" he said finally, his voice uncertain, confused. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "I'm here about the house," I said, my voice calm, professional. His face changed, confusion shifting to something like embarrassment. "Oh, right. The new owner. We're supposed to be out by the end of the week. We've been packing. Slowly. It's hard with your mother's health." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Actually," I said, letting each word land with weight, "I am the new owner." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. The kind of silence that fills every corner of a space and presses down on your chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him I heard footsteps. My mother appeared, moving slowly, one hand on the wall for balance. Her eyes widened as she recognized me. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "Some kind of joke?" "No joke," I said calmly. "I bought the house. Fair and square. You were behind on payments. It went into foreclosure. I made an offer through my company. The bank accepted. It's mine now. Legally. Completely." My father's face turned red, a flush creeping up from his neck. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking with something between anger and desperation. "This is our home." I tilted my head, studying him. "Funny," I said quietly. "It used to be mine, too. Until you kicked me out to make room for a craft studio. Remember that?" "I was 18. You gave me 2 weeks. Told me to figure it out. So I did." My mother's hand went to her chest, clutching at the fabric of her cardigan. "That was different," she said weakly, her eyes filling with tears. "You were an adult. We thought you could handle it. And now you're adults too," I replied, my voice steady. "So I guess it's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Isn't that what you said, Dad?" "Those exact words?" They tried to argue. My father said I was being cruel, that I was punishing them for a mistake they'd made years ago. That family was supposed to forgive. My mother cried and said they'd done their best, that they'd been under pressure, that Marcus had needed help, and they'd made a choice they thought was right at the time. They said they'd apologized, except they hadn't. Not once in 12 years had either of them reached out to say they were sorry. Not once had they acknowledged what they'd done. I stood there on the porch, the same porch where I used to sit and read on summer afternoons, and I listened. And when they were done, when their voices had run out of excuses and justifications, I said, "You have until the end of the month. That's more than the 2 weeks you gave me. Pack your things. Find a place. Figure it out." Then I turned and walked back to my car, my heels clicking against the concrete driveway. I didn't look back. Not once. Emma called me that night. She was 24 now, living on her own in a small apartment across town, working as an elementary school teacher. She'd heard what happened. Marcus had called her, furious, demanding she talk sense into me. "Are you really kicking them out?" she asked, and I could hear the conflict in her voice. The pull between the sister she loved and the parents who'd raised her. I'm not kicking them out, I said carefully. I'm giving them the same opportunity they gave me. To figure it out. To stand on their own 2 feet. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said softly, I think Grandpa would be proud of you, our grandfather. Dad's father. The one who used to sneak me $20 bills when I was a kid and tell me to save it for something important. The one who taught me how to change a tire in his driveway, his hands patient and steady as he showed me how to work the jack. The one who told me that family wasn't just blood, it was who showed up when things got hard. He died when I was 19, shortly after I'd been kicked out. I'd gone to the funeral standing in the back of the church, and no one had acknowledged me. Not my parents. Not Marcus. Only Emma had hugged me, quick and fierce, before being pulled away. But Grandpa had left me something. A small inheritance? $5,000. It was in a separate account, one my parents couldn't touch. And it had been the seed money I used to get my real estate license. To bet on myself when no one else would. I wish he was here, I said quietly to Emma. He is, she replied. In everything you built, we talked for an hour that night. She told me about her students, about the little girl in her class who reminded her of me, stubborn and determined and so hungry to prove herself. She told me about her tiny apartment that she loved because it was hers, earned with her own money, decorated with her own choices. And I realized she understood. She'd watched what they did to me. She'd seen the empty chair at the dinner table. She'd heard the way they talked about me like I was a mistake they'd moved past. And she'd learned the same lesson I had. That love wasn't a given. It was earned. And it could be lost. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was small, broken, a shadow of the confident woman who'd told me to leave 12 years ago. Sophia, she said, and I could hear her crying. Please, we don't have anywhere to go. Marcus can't take us in. His place is too small. We've looked at apartments, but we don't have the money for first and last month's rent. The foreclosure destroyed our credit. We're too old to start over. I listened, my phone pressed to my ear, sitting in my office with the city lights spread out below me. Part of me, the part that was still that 18-year-old kid packing her life into duffel bags, wanted to cave. To say it's okay, you can stay, I forgive you. But I didn't, because it wasn't okay. And they couldn't stay. Not for free. Not without accountability. Not without understanding what they'd done. I have a proposal, I said. You can rent the house from me. Market rate. $1,500 a month. First month, last month, and security deposit up front. Just like any other tenant. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, shallow and shocked. Rent? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. From you? From your landlord, I corrected. This is a business arrangement. If you want to stay, those are the terms. If not, the eviction notice stands. She tried to negotiate. Tried to ask for a family discount, for leniency, for the compassion they'd never shown me. She said they couldn't afford that much. That it wasn't fair to charge the market rate. That I was their daughter and I should help them. I held firm, my voice calm and professional. Take it or leave it, I said. You have 3 days to decide. They took it. They didn't have a choice. Marcus refused to help, too caught up in his own financial troubles to bail out the parents who'd given him everything. Their friends couldn't take them in. The shelters were full. So they signed the lease I drew up, professional and legal and binding. My father barely looked at me as he signed, his hand shaking slightly, making his signature jagged and uneven. My mother's hands shook too, and she had to sign twice because the first time the pen slipped. This isn't right, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Maybe not, I said, sliding the papers into my briefcase. But it's fair, and that's more than you gave me. For the first year, they paid on time. Barely. I could see the strain in the way the checks were always dated for the last possible day, the envelopes thin and worn like they'd been carried around for days before being mailed. They barely spoke to me except to report maintenance issues, a leaking pipe, a broken window latch, the furnace making a strange noise. And I handled every request promptly and professionally because I'm a good landlord, not a vindictive daughter. I hired contractors. I fixed problems. I maintained the property, but I didn't visit. I didn't call to check in. I kept it business. Only business. But slowly, over time, something shifted. My father started asking me about my business when I came by to inspect the property. How I'd built it. How I'd survived those early years. What it took to go from sleeping in a car to owning a successful firm. I kept my answers short at first, professional and distant. But over time I let him in. Little by little. I told him about the 60-hour weeks. About the clients who'd taken a chance on me. About the deals I'd closed through sheer determination. And I saw something change in his eyes. Something like respect. Something like regret. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a start. A crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. My mother apologized too, months later. She broke down one afternoon when I stopped by to check on a repair, collapsing into tears at the kitchen table and telling me through broken sobs that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. That she thought about me every day. That she'd convinced herself I was better off. That I was stronger than Marcus. That I could handle being on my own. But she'd been wrong. So wrong, and she was sorry. Sorry for the years she'd stolen. Sorry for the pain she'd caused. Sorry for choosing comfort over courage. 2 years after I bought the house, Emma got engaged. To a good man, a teacher like her, someone kind and steady. She asked me to walk her down the aisle. Not our father, me. Because you're the one who's always been there, she said. Even when they tried to erase you. Even when it hurt. You never stopped being my sister. I said yes, my throat tight with emotion. And at the wedding, my parents sat in the back. Quiet. Watching as I stood beside the sister who never stopped reaching out. Who sent me cards on my birthday every year even when I lived in my car. Who called me when she graduated college and got her first teaching job and met the man she was going to marry. And when Emma hugged me after the ceremony and whispered thank you for never giving up on me, I realized something profound. I hadn't bought that house for revenge. I'd bought it because I needed to prove to myself that I could. That the girl who slept in her car and ate ramen for years could rise. Could build. Could take back what was stolen. Not with anger, but with patience and power. That I could turn pain into purpose. That I could transform abandonment into achievement. That I could be everything they said I couldn't be, not in spite of what they did to me, but because of it. 3 years later, when I was 33, I sold the house. I didn't need it anymore. I'd proven what I needed to prove. My parents had moved into a small senior apartment by then, something they could afford on their Social Security, and the part-time work my father had found. We had dinner sometimes. Awkward at first, careful but real. I didn't forgive them because they asked. I forgave them because holding on to anger was exhausting. Because I'd built a life so full, so strong, so successful that their rejection no longer defined me. They were part of my past, but they weren't my whole story. I started a program through my firm. A mentorship initiative for young women who'd been kicked out, who'd aged out of foster care, who had nowhere to go and no one to help them. I gave them job training. Paid internships. A chance to learn real estate, to build wealth, to stand on their own feet the way I'd had to. Emma helped, teaching financial literacy classes on weekends. Rachel, my old coworker who'd let me sleep on her couch, volunteered too. We created a network of women helping women, lifting each other up, refusing to let anyone fall through the cracks the way I almost had. At 35, I stood in front of a room full of young women just starting out. I told them my story, all of it, the rejection, the car, the ramen, the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd ever be okay. And I told them the truth, that survival isn't pretty, that building yourself from nothing is the hardest thing you'll ever do, that there will be days when you want to give up, when the weight of it all feels unbearable, but that it's possible, that they're not alone. That being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're free to become something no one ever imagined. One girl, 19, recently kicked out by her family, came up to me after. She shook my hand and said, her voice fierce and determined, "I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make it just like you." I smiled, seeing myself in her eyes. "I know you will," I said. "Because I did. And so can you. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong in your own family, this story is for you. If you've ever had to choose between bitterness and building, between revenge and resilience, you already know what I learned. That the best way to prove them wrong isn't to destroy them. It's to become so undeniably successful that their rejection becomes irrelevant. That the greatest power isn't in taking them down. It's in rising so high they can't even see you anymore unless you choose to let them." Comment your city below and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Subscribe for more stories about women who took back their power and never looked back. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't what you take from them, it's what you build for yourself.